The reason we become imbalanced is because one hemisphere becomes dominant. What you really want is coherence. Only then does your system go into a more harmonious state. And only then can you receive the messages. You get more into a balanced physiology. If you're windy, fiery, earthy, you go more into a coherent, balanced state.
But there's something I really want to touch on because it really came up to me as you were talking. How much of who we are is relative to our genetics and how much is relative to our childhood trauma?
Great question. And a challenging one to answer because there's such an interplay. We know that genetics plays a role. There's no question that our genetics plays a role. Yet childhood trauma and energetics, I'll say, uh, play a much vaster role and a bigger role than I think we've ever appreciated before in the past when we studied back in the day in medical school, disease progression and inheritance of disease. We focused on the genetic inheritance. Yet now in the last couple of decades, there's been a shift. Wait a second, there's actually something else that's creating disease, this epigenetic phenomena of how you live and the lifestyle you live and the people you spend time with and the work you're doing and the environment you grew up in. And if you grew up in a traumatic environment, and if you grew up in an environment where your energy was such that if I, for example, when you think of schizophrenics and schizophrenic breaks, it often happens in ages 18, 19. Which you think, why would that happen at that age? Well, oftentimes, someone that lives in a household that's incredibly chaotic, mom and dad are screaming, there's a lot of fighting. They, to maintain order, will force themselves to be in a calmer, controlled state. The individual, the child, will maintain composure, even though the environment's chaotic, because they have to hold it together for their family. And then they get to college or they leave the house, and then the psychosis breaks because they've had to hold it in for so many years. So when it comes to genetics of something like schizophrenia, you will see very clearly in the studies, there is a certain upbringing that I would say is traumatic and affects their energy system that then pushes them maybe into more, it could be a pitta state, a vata state, one of these states that's suppressed. And then when they're allowed to be free from that, they release it. And then that creates a symptomatology, a mental physical disorder. And we see this time and time again with individuals. I have so many patients that, went to med school or law school or went through a divorce and suddenly diseases show up, right? We see this over and over again. And I'd always ask when that situation began, when the migraines began to get really severe, what was going on in your life? You always want to ask yourself that question. What was going on in my life when those symptoms appeared? Majority of the time, there is something that precedes this. We know that 75 to 90% disease, when it comes to going into a doctor's office, is due to stress, right? And so we know stress plays a big role, and the impact of stress is just unbelievable. And I go into what I call the three brain model. Didn't go through that in the discussion we had at the recent conference, but what I look at is really go deeper. First is Ayurvedic. What is your type and what's your state? But then going even deeper, let's say I'm a real windy. I'm always moving, going, doing, I'm talking a lot, I'm anxious. And by the way, when I go into freeze state, my gut gets tight. I'm constipated because the gut and the mind very much are connected together. The fight state, that's a pitta fiery state. That's an angry, hot-headed, nausea, reflux, migraine. That's that physiology. But let's just say I'm always Vata. I'm always feeling anxious. I'm always constipated. I'm always having tight neck. What keeps me stuck in that pattern? Then I go into what I call the three brain model. Well, the first brain is what we've kind of talked about, is how you're thinking, the central nervous system. How do you process stress and how do you process your world? Do you view danger when danger doesn't exist? What is your program? And is trauma linked to that? An early upbringing linked to that, which very often it is, right? Or even generational trauma. You know, the Holocaust survivors, so those years grandmother and grandfathers have gone through things that you've picked up through your energetics and genetics. And the second thing, second brain is your enteric nervous system, is how you feel. Do you process your emotions? Do you spend time with your emotions? I meet so many people that just have never been given themselves the opportunity to feel. They've just acted and performed, perfected, pleased, never sat with their own feelings about things. And it breaks my heart because there's so many individuals that create disease because of that. I was just reading about an NFL player that recently was diagnosed with ALS in his 40s. And I was kind of researching what is the link between NFL players and ALS, and start to think about, Gabor Mate and all his work with trauma. And when you look at it, the intensity of being a player, when you think about the sports that are going on right now, like in you're in the world of fitness, the intensity of being in that role and being that person that has to perform at the highest level all the time. You can't show all your emotions. Like it's a lot. You're carrying a lot for the world when you're that high level. And unfortunately, these, I believe, do translate into potential diseases. So second brain is the emotions and do we process? And I think that one of us, all of us at some point can spend more time with feeling and connecting with our feeling and being vulnerable about how we feel, you know? And the third brain's the microbiome. And so what I work with is really looking at those three brains and saying, are each of these brains being, appropriately managed? Are you stuck in a ruminating pattern? Are you suppressing your emotions? Are you not eating healthy? Most people nowadays are eating more healthy than they were years ago. The second and third brain, I think, the second and the first brain are the ones that I believe most people can work more on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of looking at it. And we know that communication between the brain and the gut is about 80% of the gut relaying information back to the brain. And then with leaky gut, we've got obviously the vagus nerve that allows information to go to the brain, which, we can talk about Alzheimer's, dementia, and type of things because it really is, as you said, inflammation that comes in. But what fascinates me is the way that you broke it down into three different areas that then all have to work synergistically together. And do you have a certain protocol where you start on one area first relative to where the person's there? Because gut health may be the cause for the brain issue, or how do you work on that? Or even emotional, because we have emotional eating.
Yeah. The easiest place to start is the gut. And I think when I was thinking about clinical practice, it was always a nice first step to take, especially someone I'm just meeting, just getting to know. Let's look at digestive function. Let's look at food intolerances, the microbiome testing. Let's kind of assess, are you the fiery person? If so, maybe stay away from the spicy foods because fiery should stay away from spicy foods and work there first. And then what I would do is then move into the other, you know. And generally, when you think about the entire picture, it's top down, bottom up, as you're mentioning. The way we think and feel affects the gut, our microbiome, and the way we digest affects how we think and feel. Yet what I believe is the real game changer here is the enteric nervous system. It's the feeling system. If you look at studies, you will see that there are certain types of bacteria that actually regulate our ability to respond to stress. And these bacteria actually regulate our emotions. If you've heard of the field of psychobiotics, it's all the prebiotics and probiotics that actually regulate the gut bacteria that then regulate how we feel. So there's this interesting interplay between feelings and emotions in the gut microbiome. So you can make a case for let's shift the microbiome, make sure we get those proper psychobiotics and improve the gut function so we feel. We make more serotonin. We make every neurotransmitter in the gut. 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, as you know. So let's kind of improve the microbiome, right? So then we can improve neurotransmitter production. There's a definitely you can make a case for that. Though I'd like to go a little deeper and say, when you think of the amygdala, the sensing threat detectors, right? The amygdala are always on and sensing. They're the ones that carry the trauma, those little almond shaped structures in our brain. They carry that suitcase of trauma that we're carrying in our lives. And very, very quickly at a subconscious level, they make a decision whether to lean in. Do we like this person? Or lean back? We don't really. There's something there that's a threat. And what we know is that we often, as split second, we feel first because the amygdala is detecting before we think a thought. So the feeling to me, the enteric nervous system and touching in with your feelings, your intuition, tapping in to what does your gut say about this, you know, and teaching each other to do that more, teaching each other to follow the gut instinct, teaching each other to listen to the gut. If I had a friend recently telling me about a situation she had with a colleague and she's thinking through it. And I said, what does your gut tell you? And I had her pause. I said, what is your gut saying? Every time you talk to this individual, what is your gut? And she's like, I always get this kind of churning. I get this kind of sense. Even when as I'm saying that, my phone's ringing. But he's like, I was just gonna say, even when my phone rings and I see the name, is that funny? I'm like, I see that person calling me. My gut starts to churn. I said, well, then what is that telling you?
Mm,
As we think through this, why don't you trust your gut? Your gut is communicating with you. So we could probably have a debate. Is it the microbiome that's having the feeling, or is it that amygdala that's sensing and you're having a feeling? We could probably look into some studies. It'd be interesting, though I feel that the enteric nervous system, the 200 to 600 million neurons in the gut are a powerhouse and they can work without the first brain. You could do a vagotomy, right? Cut the vagus nerve and the
mm.
enteric, the gut will operate it completely on its own without intervention from the first brain with the central nervous system. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I always say the greatest technology in the world is between our ears, and the greatest system in the world is from the head down. It's incredible what we've got.
Yeah.
But there was something that, again, I love what you're saying. It's fascinating. And I look at it and go, when we talk about feeling, and I know you've talked about trust your gut, why did we ever come up with that? That saying's been around way before we actually understood the level of the gut, trust your gut.
Mm.
But how much of that now, going back to your mindset coaching and your neurological expertise, is what we're taught in society because we look at everything as an opportunity. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Don't say no to somebody because that may be the one opportunity. So we live in fear of loss, which is actually a mindset training that we have from children growing up. How much
Mhm.
of that is actually mindset, and how do we look at it and say it's time for me to let go of our teaching and go into a new me?
Mm. Beautiful question. Unfortunately, I believe that and I actually did studies on this. I'm thinking back to my clinical days. I had a cool technology, a WAVI technology, this brain mapping technology, where I was able to assess how much of us operate from our left brain versus our right brain. And 90% of individuals I tested in my practice were left brain dominant. Left brain's that logical, organized, factual, very data driven part of us. And when you do, more research and reading on this, the reason we become imbalanced is because one hemisphere becomes dominant. And what we really want is coherence. We'd like that corpus callosum to allow beautiful communication with both sides of the brain. So we're in coherence. And when you're in coherence, the left and right brain are in coherence, and both are operating at a high level, only then does your system go into a more harmonious state. And only then can you receive the messages? I believe the conscious awareness from the divine, and I'm a very spiritual person. And you get more into a balanced physiology. If you're windy, fiery, earthy, you go more into a coherent, balanced state. My favorite breath technique is reverse nostril breathing. And reverse nostril breathing, ancient technique, is really to harmonize the right and left hemisphere. So to answer your question, really what it comes down to is the right brain is the intuitive. It's the feeling aspect of ourselves. And most individuals are not tapping into that aspect. They're not pausing and reflecting on their feelings first. They're letting their thinking and their operating system that's been dictated by society determine their next step, determine their path, determine who to spend time with and what job to take. Where if everyone, myself included, we quiet that aspect of ourselves and we just take pause, we take time to feel and to receive and to just be with us, our sense of what is the best answer without me thinking, what am I feeling is the best answer. That first brain, because we're programmed to think, we're intellectual human beings that want to have a thought, want to have an answer, want to have a logical response. And then within that, we program ourselves to please and to perfect and to overperform and overdo it. We get lost. And I was mentioning it even in my talk how I got stuck into a state. I was in that, kind of personality state. And the therapist asked me, "Are you feeling stressed?" I said, "No," because that physiology got me into medical school, got me to be very successful. Yet that wasn't really me. That was that protector me coming out. That was living in accordance to what everyone wanted me to do. Right. So if I'm answering your question, if I can, I know it's a long-winded answer, but moving over the right brain, allowing ourselves to feel, being more creative, being more playful, doing things that don't always have a purpose, taking a dance class, just going out and walking in the grass and just singing a song, just relaxing into yourself and letting your right brain be creative. Listen to the birds. Just listen to those birds. Wow. Oh, God, they're beautiful. Just being in that space, you start to receive answers and messages. And I just think that's something that all of us could benefit from.
So much of what you're saying is really go back to nature.
Yeah.
Go back to our beginning in so many ways. When we were kids, we played, and I'm a huge believer that we don't stop playing because we age. We age because we stop playing.
Yes.
Takes away so much of us. There's
Absolutely.
there's a couple of things just to wrap up now, but when I say wrap up, I would love for you to come back on because this is so, like you said, it's over 5,000 years old, and yet it's so new in what we hear. And I know people are going to have a lot of questions. So I'd love for people
Sure.
to ask the questions, come back in, and then we'll bring you back on because I'd love to go deeper on this. But two things.
Yeah.
One, you said that you had problems. First of all, it was falling asleep and then staying asleep,
Mhm.
right? Or was it the other way around? It was like you'd fall asleep and then you couldn't stay asleep, and then it became where you couldn't even go to sleep.
It was actually falling asleep was first, which is actually a windy imbalance. Vata imbalance is falling, so it was falling asleep first, and then eventually, I just didn't sleep at all, you know? So first I'd fall asleep at, like, 4 or 5, I think it was, like, 4 or 5 in the morning, sleep for 3 hours and get up, and then I was just up all night. So then it became a secondary. And how this happens in Eastern medicine, a little trick, if you're Vata, windy, most disease is because of too much movement. Vata imbalance is like 80% of disease. Wind, just like a campfire, wind blows on the fire. So when you're windy, neurons are excitable, they become inflammatory. So we always believe that wind blows onto fire. So windy energy turns into pitta, fiery energy. So we call it bidoshic in terms of both energies were imbalanced, but the provoker was the wind that got me to be fired up. And it was that led to the problem staying asleep too.
It's fascinating because I hear so many people that say, and I'm in this state sometimes, especially when I got projects going on and I'm working with China or I'm working with different countries. I work India, Pakistan, Germany, England, and so you're on different time frames. Waking up around 2, I hear this from so many people. I fall asleep, but I wake up every morning at 2 o'clock and I can't go back to sleep again.
Mhm.
What would you advise them to start looking into?
Yeah. Classic liver and classic fire imbalance. And so I'd start to ask number 1, some of the basic things. What are you eating during the day? Are you eating late at night? Are you eating food that's hard for your liver to process? Start thinking about liver function and are we cleansing effectively? Because when you wake up, so 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. is your liver cleansing time in Ayurveda. So you want to try to get to bed at 10 if you can, because then you're really detoxing all of the toxins, physical and emotional. We believe in Ayurveda, physical and emotional ama is toxin. You're cleansing during that time. So once you kind of get past that window, you should be done with cleansing. So if you're up, if you wake up, that means your system isn't done cleansing. Now, this is a tricky thing. Is it the physical toxins when we think of toxins like mold and toxins, or is it emotional toxins that you haven't cleansed? Are you still holding on to anger? Are you still, you know, upset about something that happened or holding resentment or anxious? And the energy of toxin can be both physical and emotional. So that's where you want to delve and explore. So the wake up at 2, I'd think about the liver structurally and physical toxin cleansing, and also the emotional aspect, which is usually anger and frustration. And then also, do we need to be forgiving others maybe a little bit more? Maybe we're holding on to something that's keeping our liver fire energy up. Um, and that's kind of how I'd start with that.
That's fascinating because I think sometimes we forget we're holding on to anger because we've moved on, but at a cellular level and at an emotional level, we haven't let go and it's still living in us, even though we're not consciously thinking about it. So our conscious has become our subconscious, but our subconscious runs our system, especially when we're not conscious. So
Yes.
beautiful that. The last thing, so many people do suffer with headaches,
Mhm.
migraines. I hear it a lot as well. And they go and the first thing that's said is the doctors say, take this drug, take this pill. We obviously talk about hydration and the changes in the brain. What's one tip you could give people and then give us your website so people can go and delve deeper?
Yeah, and gosh, we should really do a whole podcast on migraines because it is my passion. Spent 20
I'd
years.
love to.
20 years. My mom had severe migraines, and what I know now, So in a nutshell, and God bless for those that have pain. Just so you know, the most recent, you might already very much know this. The most recent global health report looked at what is the number one cause of years lived with disability, YLD, in those less than age 50, and it is headaches, with migraine being right at the top. So, w- disability, what we call presenteeism, where you're there, but you're not really there. Absenteeism, you're not showing up at work. Presenteeism, you're at work, but you're not really at work. You're cognitively, you're in pain, you're not focusing. Obviously, during a migraine, when people have migraines, they score the same score on a mini mental status exam as an Alzheimer's patient. It is hard to think. If you ever had a migraine, God bless, it is so hard to think and to focus and to process. Now we have a new line of pharmaceuticals that have come, the CGRP antagonist. We could talk about that next time and that gut connection to those. Are those safe? Are those not? We could talk about those like GLP-1s, very similar conversation. The reality is we have better tools. What's one tip? Well, the first thing to know about migraine is that very often when you're challenged with these episodes, which basically it is your gut that is activating the brain, it's winding the brain up through the trigeminal nervous system, which innervates the meninges in the face. The neck starts first, oftentimes, and then it goes behind one of the eyes. That is your system basically letting you know you're in danger. So, the very first question I often ask when someone comes in with severe migraines, what is it that is your perception of danger in your life that your system is giving you the message of pain so you can step away from? Is the danger signal coming from, and just what area of life is it? Is it family? Is it relationships? Is it your career? Where is that danger signal coming from? And then what is it you can do to change that? And it's amazing how intuitive most migraine patients are. They know. They know, like, yeah, I work with this really difficult boss. He's so toxic. And, as the workload goes up and I just have a hard time saying no, I tend to get a migraine. Okay, there's your pattern. NLP is all about pattern interrupt. Neurolinguistic programming is we all have patterns that we do over and over. And oftentimes you're measuring subconscious. Yeah, because the subconscious drives the pattern. So then, okay, get the migraine. What's the 24-hour window before that? And let's not just talk about the weather and hormones and food. Let's go a little deeper. Let's go to the emotions. Because I know the answer most people want is, okay, it's my hormones. Let me take a little extra progesterone. Or it's the vitamin D level. Or it's magnesium. I get that. Yes, those help. And we can talk about that in the next podcast. Those are helpful. But the real core of it is, what is your system trying to tell you with the pain? Where is the danger coming from? And how can you address that? And that's where I think that's where the migraine pain can just disappear if you get to the root of it.
Incredible. Your website.
Website, it is my first and last name, so Trupti Gokani, MD, TruptiGokani.com. TruptiGokaniMD.com.
And we'll put that in the notes as well. And I know you've got the book, The Stress RX, as well.
Stress
It's
RX
out.
and Just prescription to happiness and health, Ayurvedic prescription. And the first book is 2015. I don't want that to be forgotten because that's really the migraine combination with Ayurveda. I go into food intolerance testing, adrenal fatigue, did some studies in my clinic, and it was amazing at that time in 2015 how little we knew about the impact of the gut and the brain. And now we know so much more. And I want to move people from the gut to start going into how we think and how we feel. And yes, diet is important. Yet, I think the big game changers, Dan, are really thinking, changing our thought patterns, and working on emotions. We can really accomplish a lot if we can spend some time in those areas.
Incredible. Well, I want you back on as soon as you're available. So you let me know because we can focus just on the first book,
Let's do
really
that.
get into the migraine. And you're a gift. My last question, how would you like to be remembered in 50 years' time, the impact you've made on people in the world?
Okay, 50 years, how I'd like to be remembered. Someone who really embraced all ways of thinking and allowed freedom of expression of belief systems, be it your Western thinking, your Eastern thinking, someone who really allows the bridge of those worlds and honors that, because that's acceptance and that's giving people an ability to find themselves and for me to meet them where they are and for them to meet themselves where they are.
That's beautiful. Dr. Trupti, thank you so much for sharing your information. It's even more powerful than I remember you on stage, which was already powerful. It's a gift to have you on here. And please let me know when we get you back on as soon as possible. You are changing the world one life at a time.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure.